Hello and welcome to Calls. This is the 2022 Masters Initial Research Show. Exciting week, the first major of the PGA Tour season, kicking off what is 4 straight months with a major in it, also known as major season. So quite an exciting week, but not to be overlooked was the win by JJ Spaun this week at the Valero. With that win, he now gets into the field at Augusta. So a lot of buzz, as is every year at this time for the Masters. We're here for everything this week, from research to data, DFS, and maybe even a show Tuesday night. So if you want to see a special show, give a like to the video, shoot a comment, whether it's a player breakdown, a course breakdown, whatnot. So let's not delay any further. Quite an exciting week. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It's an amazing resource. Go check them out, especially in big prime weeks like the Masters, like the majors, the WGCs. Honestly, it's the best tool out there. Go check them out. It is well worth your investment. In the description of the video, both on Twitch and on YouTube, there are links to my social media where you can find where I place my betting cards for the week, any interesting research that I do throughout the week. I try to post to Twitter. I had an interesting thing last week on the Valero. Speaking of, did you have JJ Spaun, any outright wagers? Did you have him in DFS and whatnot? So make sure you give me a follow at the links in the description if you want to see my betting cards and any of the interesting research that I find during the week. And finally, we are live. Chat is open. I want to hear, did you have JJ Spaun in outright wagers, in DFS? I mentioned Aaron Baddeley as a 6K play, literal 6,000 minimum. Did you use him? He ended up top 20ing. I was pretty happy with that call. But there were plenty of others that I was wrong. Adam Hadwin I was wrong on. Ryan Palmer, now he had a pretty poor Saturday, but for the first 2.5 days, he was pretty strong. I felt not very smart about that one, considering I was trying to stay away from him. There were several good and bad things that I had last week. Didn't have JJ Spaun outright on a winner, but I did have him in the top 20. And you would have seen that in the betting card last Wednesday night after the show. So I want to hear from you all in the chat. Please jump in. Want the interaction. I believe there are a couple of community wagers we'll have to settle, which will be fun. Jump in there if you want to have a little bit of boastful fun from last night's Final Four games. Unfortunately, the fandom of my team is eliminated, so it is what it is. It was a great year, but we're here for all of that in the chat. And as always, if you're just wanting to jump in and make fun of me for all of the terrible picks that I make, it's well warranted. So let's not delay any further. Let's do our initial research and kick off major season for the 2022 Masters. And we come over here like we always do at the beginning of an initial research show with the GCSAA tournament fact sheet. Let me make sure I have chat up and going. Joey, yes, it is Masters Week. One of, if not the most exciting weeks on the PGA Tour. How was your weekend? How are your brackets looking? Did you have any DFS this week? Hopefully you had some JJ Spaun outright, all that stuff. So thanks for checking in on a Sunday evening of the most exciting week of the year, at least in my opinion. So we come here to the famed Augusta National Golf Club. Best tournament hands down. Yeah, what brackets? Yeah. It's the first week of April, therefore it is Masters Week. There are no more brackets, right? But we are at the famed, iconic Augusta National Golf Club in Augusta, Georgia. It is a Alistair McKenzie and Bobby Jones design. It is a long par 72, measures just over 7,500 yards. Most of the holes everybody is pretty well familiar with. Again, if you're wanting to see a course breakdown or a player breakdown, give a like on the video. Comment below what you might want to see Tuesday night if you want a special show, and I'll try to make that happen. But course statistics, slightly larger greens than the average tour event. These measure to close to 6,500 square feet, whereas the average tour green is about 6,000. So slightly larger greens. Not a lot of bunkers in play at Augusta. There are 5 holes with water in play. The greens are bent and generally lightning fast. Bent greens, these are some of the fastest greens on tour, rivaling only really the Arnold Palmer for fastest greens on tour. The API and the Masters generally are lightning fast every year. We're on bent greens with rye throughout the rest of the course, in the rough, in the fairways, and all that. So the big takeaways, again, a very long par 72. So we will definitely be looking at long course metrics. We are definitely going to be looking at lightning bent grass putting performances. Don't have much to do on the course architect, Bobby Jones. Large greens, even though they're larger than the average tour event, we're going to see why greens in regulation are so very important. But that is not due to the size of the greens. So again, main takeaways: long par 72, fast bent greens, and due to the length, it's pretty difficult. It's a major. It's going to be difficult. But there is a look at the GCSAA tournament fact sheet for Augusta National. We're going to move on over to Fantasy National, and I've went ahead and got this preset for the 2022 season, last 36 rounds. The only person that is not here is JJ Spawn with his win at the Valero earlier this afternoon. So tomorrow I'm hoping Fantasy National will have this updated with JJ Spawn in the field. So your top performers so far in the 2022 PGA Tour season by a strokes gained total look, the past 36 rounds, they are Justin Thomas, Cameron Smith, Scotty Scheffler, Russell Henley, John Rahm, Tom Hoagie, Patrick Cantley, Sam Burns, Matt Fitzpatrick, Victor Hovland, and Billy Horschel. And that order will not change tomorrow. The highest player that was in the field this week for the Valero is Hideki and Rory. Hideki ended up withdrawing, so I don't think his stats are actually put in Fantasy National. Rory obviously missing the cut. Luke List made the cut to a pretty poor performance on the weekend. And I don't see too many other players up here that played this past week. Corey Connors, Gary Woodland down here. So not much is going to change in terms of at least a strokes gained total view, and none of the top 10 should change. So those are your top 10 performers so far up to this week, leading into the Masters, the past 36 rounds. But before we get any further into researching and data or whatnot, let's take a look at Augusta National from a course scorecard look, a graphical view. And one of the biggest things that we're going to see throughout the week is that a lot of the data from the Masters tournament is proprietary, meaning we don't have access to all of it. We can gather as much as we can, but things like strokes gained approach, strokes gained off the tee, scrambling, all of that is proprietary. So there's a limited amount of data we can gather. We're definitely going to slice and dice and dissect and research all of the data that we can. And I've went ahead and put some spreadsheets together over the weekend in preparation a lot for tomorrow, but we'll look at one tonight in particular with the data that we can gather. But just know that going in this week that there is a limited amount of data that we can gather for the Masters. You'll notice here on the scorecard at Augusta National that generally when I start, I try to find the 9th and 10th difficulty hole. If you're playing to a true average, 9th or 10th most difficult should play to par. Well, 9th and 10th here at Augusta National, the Masters, you've got 1700ths and 1300ths over par. That tells you it's going to be a difficult course. In fact, you have to come to the 14th most difficult hole to come to par. So while there are a few holes that are indeed easy, the par 5 second placed at 3/10 under par. You've got the easiest hole, the par 5 13th, placed at 3/10 under par. The 15th, par 5 15th, placed to almost 3/10 under par. So there are a decent amount of birdies out here, mainly in the par 5s. Even the par 5s do yield a fairly realistic eagle chance if you hit 2 very good shots. Now the 8th is not the best of eagle chances, but it's certainly a birdie. There should be birdie. It plays to a quarter stroke under par. But you do have a fair amount of eagles on the par 5s, and the par 5s you pretty much need to birdie, or you're going to be losing strokes on the field. But the rest of the course is pretty darn brutal. The first hole, second most difficult, placed at 3/10 over par. The long par 4 11th plays to almost 4/10 over par. 3/10 over par, quarter stroke over par, quarter stroke over par. Just big numbers everywhere you turn on this course. It is difficult. Like I said, the greens are extremely fast. It requires a lot of precise, precise maneuvering around Augusta National. It's as simple as that. So there is a look quickly at the scorecard, and we'll come back to this a little bit here due to the lack of graphs that Fantasy National, just because of the data that they can't gather. We'll see something there here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and move down to the average strokes gained by hole by par. Normally we would have, approach, putting, off the tee, and around the green. We don't have that. We don't have any of that data, so we can't evaluate that. So we have to go straight into the strokes gained by hole by par. You can see for the top 10 finishers, par 5s, and then par 4s and par 3s. So a fairly normal distribution here, you would think. Pretty darn close, though, to be fair. Pay attention to your y-axis. I know it's getting a little cut off. So this is 2/10, 1500ths, 1/10. So, the par 5s are, 0.17, whereas the par 4s are right under or right at 0.15. So not a lot of separation. But as you move up the leaderboard, you can see that now the par 5s are above 0.2. The par 4s start really distancing themselves from the par 3s. And then your winners are really taking advantage of the par 5s. The par 4s, they're scoring when they can and holding on the par 3s. So I want you to take a notice here that the par 4s, even though they're not as important as the par 5s, so we're definitely going to be taking a look at par 5s this week. They are the most strokes gained. Look how close they are when looking at historical winners here at Augusta National. It is pretty darn close between par 4s and par 5s. Now, as you move down the leaderboard, yes, the par 5s become much more important, meaning the guys in the top 5, the top 10, they aren't scoring as well on the par fours. I mean, even the top 20s, it looks like it's a bigger a difference. But I mean, really, you have 0.11 to 0.10 and 0.13. So it's pretty minuscule in terms of difference for the top 20s. But again, you move up the leaderboards, par fours and par fives really separate themselves from the par threes. You'll notice that we do not have any approach shot distribution, and we don't have any course composition. Lengths of par threes, lengths of par fours, and the amounts of each. I'm going to finish the Fantasy National course breakdown, and I went ahead and made the this chart in Microsoft Excel like I did for the Dell Match Play. It is pretty crude, but it's per Pro Visualizer, so I did the best I could there, and I did the best that I could with the approach shots. I am nowhere near confident in saying that they should be taken as law, as rule, but I can just go by per Pro Visualizer. So when you look here at the scoring distribution, just talking to the difficulty of Augusta National, you have many more bogeys than birdies. You have about 20% bogeys to 16 or 17% birdies, and then you actually have a legitimate bar here for doubles. And the Eagles, while there is a little bit of it, it's nowhere near outweighing or close to the doubles. And you stack the bogeys and the doubles on top of the birdies and the Eagles, you can tell that this is definitely on the more difficult end. I would classify it as difficult. I think Fantasy National might be average, but certainly right on the borderline of average and difficult. I am going to say it's difficult. It's a major. Augusta National does not like when players shoot low scores. The historic cut line here at Augusta National for the Masters last year was +1, but has been as high recently as +7 in 2017. You go way back, it was +9. Generally, it's been hovering probably in the +4 range. 2019 was +4, +6, +7. Last year +1, so never under par, never really even par. It's always over par, but the past 2 years have gotten quite a bit lower. I would imagine probably the +4 is about the average, maybe 4 to 5. You can see historically has been around in there, so I'd say that's probably a good decent average here is +4. Is the historic cut line. Driving accuracy is a lot higher here. That isn't to say that there are a lot of forced layups. Guys just know that they have to be in the fairway to have any chance here. Even though the rough is short, you don't want to mess with the pine straw and dealing with all of that, trying to maneuver around this course. There's an emphasis on fairways because if you aren't in the fairway, it's going to be hard to control your spin and trajectories and all that to hold these very, very firm, very fast greens. So there's just an emphasis on accuracy. Even though the green size is a little bit larger than the average tour event, greens here are much more difficult to hit. That speaks to the difficulty, that speaks to the length of Augusta National. So greens are one of the premier primary indicators of success here at Augusta National. So that is going to be one very, very, very focused on statistic this week. Scrambling percentage, much lower here than the average tour event. And then the last thing that should probably be no surprise, but it's stark to see just how much it is. The average 3 putts per round, so much higher here than the average tour event. Speaking to the lightning quick greens, the size of the greens, it's just not easy to putt on these greens. So there will be focus on 3-putt avoidance this week. I can almost guarantee you that I'll have 5% 3-putt avoidance in the final mixed condition model. So there is a look at Augusta National from a graphical and scorecard view. And before we go any further, I mentioned that I made the 2 charts that are normally there. So let me switch over to Microsoft Excel view here real quick. Yeah. So, and bring chat back up. So, that is the proximity. So here is the scorecard. And I took this from Fantasy National, not Pro Visualizer. This is from Fantasy National. Here are the lengths of the 3s, 4s, and 5s. So you have 2 par 3s that measure from 150 to 175, 1 from 175 to 200, and 1 225 plus. In the par 4 range, you have 1 350 to 400. You have 3 that measure from 400 to 450, 5 that measure from 450 to 500, and 1 that is 500 plus. That is the most difficult hole, hole 11. And then your 4 par 5s are split evenly between 500 and 600, the lower half of 550 and the upper half of 550. So we're going to see if there is a range of, or a length of par 5 that matters the most, par 3s, par 4s. I'm just going to spill the beans here. This length of par 5, or par 4, excuse me, is extremely important. Per Pro Visualizer, I went through each hole and just by their standards, kind of went and tried to estimate some approach shot lengths. Normally, I put all the par 5s in the 75 to 100 mark and kind of elaborate that they deserve to go in here based on attacking par 5s. I didn't even mess around with that. Most players, unless they're extremely out of position, are going to go for the par 5s here at Augusta. So I went ahead, put all 4 of the par 5s in here. So there is one legitimate 75 to 100, and that is the extremely short par 4. Assuming players don't try to drive that green, it's going to leave them with an extremely short wedge. So that's where this one comes in. And then again, per Pro Visualizer, you have 1 from 125 to 150, 5 from 150 to 175, 3 from 175 to 200, and then I put all of the par 5s here. So that is a very crude best guess at estimated approach shot distributions. Certainly, we're going to be looking, or we would look at the longer end of approach shots, but we don't have any proximity numbers to gather. So the only thing we would do is speculate as to what length we think would matter the most, and then find who has been most successful recently from those lengths. So speaking of that, jump in the comments, jump in chat if you're watching live. If there's an approach shot range that you think is most valuable here, I don't think I tend to lean on any of these as being more predominant or more important than the others, but my struggle with proximity in terms of a data analysis, from a data analysis perspective, is well known. I'm quite transparent with that. So, jump in the comments, jump in chat. Do you think there is a range that is most important here? So there is a look at the 2 charts that aren't in Fantasy National, the course composition chart and the estimated proximity chart. Again, both per, or at least the estimated proximity per Pro Visualizer, and then the lengths. This chart is from Fantasy National, just brought over to Microsoft Excel. So let's revert back to Fantasy National here. Transition over to the web page. Bring chat back up. Don't mind me as I talk to myself. Make sure I do everything that I need to do. So there is a look at the course breakdown in an Microsoft Excel view and a Fantasy National view. So let's take a look at some historic conditions before we move on in our research and try to focus on players or specific stats that we can gather. So you will notice that the 2020 tournament is not in here. That is from the fall when Dustin Johnson won. It is a pretty unique Masters in the sense that it's the only one that's been played in the fall. I ignored that entire tournament in terms of gathering the data. Yes, it was at the Masters, but it was so unique and so different that I thought that entire tournament was an outlier. So I did not gather stats from that tournament. But speaking to the past 2 or 3 years or so, again, Fantasy National has labeled it as average to difficult in most rounds. I would tend to think it's difficult. Certainly not easy in the past 2 years, and only in round 4 of 2018 was it easy. Now, Fantasy National has it labeled easy years prior. Don't know if I agree with that, but that's their standard. I am definitely going to be going more on the average to difficult end. Greens have always been bent. Firmness is medium. Again, I would have no real way to say that's right or wrong. I don't know how that's measured. Hitting fairways has generally been easy. We saw that in the graph. Players just, sometimes they take 3-wood even though the hole would demand driver. They just know that fairways are such a premium here. Rough has always been short. Speaking to the speed of the greens, they were lightning last year. We generally don't get the speeds or the stimp meter readings, but it's safe to say that they're lightning, and it's always been over 7,400 yards. So take a notice at the wind here. I do have Wind Finder up just to see if there was anything interesting forecast this week, and there is, at least what I would think is interesting for Georgia this time of year. So we'll look at that here before we go to the full-on Microsoft Excel portion of the show. But there's a look at the prior tournament conditions here at the Masters. Finally, here is a look, or this is the tournament history tab at Fantasy National. The guys that have played this tournament the best since 2017, you'll notice that they do have both 2021s up here. You'll see Dustin Johnson's, while it says 2021, it was in the 2021 season, played in the fall of 2020. I, again, threw all this out, but it is still at Augusta National, so they have it in here. So in the past 5 tournaments, John Rahm is the player with the most strokes gained total, has had the best success in a pure performance standpoint. It's always made the cut. 4 top 10s, 4 straight top 10s. DJ missed the cut last April, but has otherwise won in the fall, runner-up the year prior. His 3 cuts made were all top 10s and then missed the cut last April. Your defending champ Hideki off the withdrawal from the Valero, so still dealing with that injury. If you watched any of the Valero, he had that what looked like KT tape or athletic tape on his neck. So clearly the neck, the back is bothering him. Again, be wary of Hideki this week. Any wagers, any DFS, just be wary of Hideki. Jordan Spieth, your 2015 14 winner, 14 or 15. Has played great here. You know, he's had one middling finish, but otherwise great performances. Justin Rose, runner-up in 2017, top 10 last year. He's 4 for 5. Justin Thomas, 5 for 5. Only one top 5, which is a little surprising considering JT generally plays well here. Rory trying to complete his career Grand Slam. 3 top 10s, 2 of them being top 5s. Did miss the cut last year. Pretty disappointing Masters for him last year. Patrick Reed, former champion. Cameron Smith's 4 for 4. Tony Finau's 4 for 4 here. Webb Simpson is 4 for his last 4. And then at the other end of the spectrum, these are guys that you would probably think wouldn't be all that great. Larry Mize, Sandy Lyle, these past champions, Vijay Singh. It is surprising to see Billy Horschel so far in the negatives in terms of strokes gained total. He did miss the cut his first run here. At least I think 2018 was his first run. And then, middling to clunker performances. Made cuts, but clunker finishes here. Zach Johnson, he is 2 for 4 again. I don't really include the fall. So he's 2 for 4. Hatton is 3 for 4, but two pretty poor made cuts. Now he did top 20 last year. Gary Woodland, 2 for 4. Kenzie Hughes only 1 time. Shane Lowry is somebody who has historically just not played this well at all. He is 1 for 3. Kisner, 3 for 4, but nothing be above the top 20. So there is a look at the strokes gained total prior performance for these players. I went ahead and made the spreadsheet that I normally make with whatever data that we could gather. But let's move on into Fantasy National. Do some research here. We know that we are going to be on bent greens, so I'm definitely going to have to take off the 2022 season filter. We are on bent greens. I am extremely confident that they're going to be lightning fast. So I have this in the past 6 months. Let's expand it out to the last 12 months. So these 5 rounds, I imagine, all of the Masters and then the Memorial. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the fast filter. I know that they're probably going to be just lightning, but just to get enough of a sense of the guys that perform well on extremely fast bent greens, I'm going to have to add the fast filter. I'm going to use the custom date range. I'm going to go April the 12th. That should eliminate last year's Masters. And again, we don't get putting data from last year's Masters anyway. So let's see, Finau was in last year's Masters. Yeah, so this doesn't include that. So from last year's Masters forward, your top performers on fast and lightning bent greens are Patrick Cantlay, Rory, Abraham Ancer, Seamus Power, Mackenzie Hughes, Jason Kokrak, John Rahm, Cam Davis, Zach Johnson, and Dustin Johnson. Don't worry, Abraham Ancer is in the field. This is a carryover from the Valero this past week when Abraham Ancer did withdraw. But I have not seen anything that he has withdrawn from the Masters. So this is pretty common practice in Fantasy National. It generally takes them a day or so after the Valero or the previous tournament to update the withdrawals and such. But there's your top 10 in terms of putting on fast and lightning bent greens. Gonna remove that filter. We're going to keep the same custom range filter because we are going to move to long courses just like we did for the Valero. There are 15 rounds. So your top performers on long courses since last year's Masters: Rory, Gary Woodland, Scotty Scheffler, Cameron Smith, John Rahm, Luke List, Tyrrell Hatton, Joaquin Niemann, Victor Hovland, and Taylor Gooch. Probably no shock on most of these players. Now, be mindful. Like Cameron Smith only has 4 rounds. They're all from the Century, so there's not a lot of data here, but it's the only data we can gather. There's just not that many, classified long courses on the PGA Tour, at least long by Fantasy National standards being 7,400 yards. The other thing that I want to do as an overview, and I know that Fantasy National labeled most of the rounds as average, I am going to add the difficulty. So scoring relative to par, I'm going to add the difficulty filter and put it at difficult. There are plenty of rounds here. So your top performers when par is difficult in a round, those players are Colin Morikawa, Scotty Scheffler, Louis, John Rahm, Rory, Daniel Berger, DJ, Abraham Answer, Victor Hovland, and Patrick Reed. So again, the cream of the crop, the best players in the world. There is a look at what I wanted to do as in terms of an overview or a full-size sample, say everything on difficult, everything on long, and whatnot. Something else that I'm going to do before we remove this filter, the date filter, I'm going to come over to Windfinder, and I mentioned how I took a look at the forecast, and it seemed like it was going to be pretty interesting, at least what I would think is interesting for Georgia's standards this time of year. So you notice Sunday, Monday, not really all that much, highs in the mid-70s, what I would expect. Tuesday gets cooler, gets some rain. Wednesday night gets rain. And then Thursday is really windy. And I want you to take a look at Friday and Saturday and Sunday. Friday, a projected high of 63 with 16 sustained mile-an-hour winds, gusts up to 26. More of the same on Saturday with a high of 57. And then Sunday, it really dies off, gets warmer. But Friday and Saturday look like they are going to be blustery, chilly, especially in the morning. Is some very difficult conditions to deal with on any course. You put them in a major, on a course that demands accuracy. It just demands your entire game to be clicking on all cylinders. It's going to be a tough test if indeed that forecast holds true. So I am going to add the windy. See how many rounds there are. It does not look like there is going to be enough. Only 12. So I'm going to add the moderate. So moderate and windy conditions. I believe there's going to be plenty. Yeah, there's 36. A lot of players have 36. So plenty enough rounds. So from last year's Masters forward, or I should say from the RBC Heritage of last year up to I guess it's the Corrales, and then tomorrow the Valero will be added to the database. So from last year's RBC Heritage on, your top performers in windy conditions: Sung Jae, John Rahm, Patrick Cantlay, Scotty Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, Joaquin Niemann, Justin Thomas, Cam Smith, Louis Oosthuizen, and Sam Burns. All right, so good stuff there. Louis, Cam Smith, Australian, deals with the wind a lot. Niemann has been well known to play, is well known for being a good player in the wind. So good stuff there. So I wanted to bring up Windfinder for that. I'm going to start narrowing this back in. 36 rounds, last 6 months, and take off the wind filters. Definitely going to get into a lot of data tomorrow for the Data Dive show. But anyone who knows me knows that I much prefer strokes gained approach, even though we don't have that data, say off the tee approach, around the green, all that stuff. I still prefer strokes gained approach players. It's the most important statistic for long-term success, or that's indicative of long-term success. So your top, let me add the 2022 season filter here. So your top strokes gained approach players, this PGA Tour season or 36 rounds, whichever is more prominent. Those players are Russell Henley, Victor Hovland, Will Zalatoris, Justin Thomas, Tom Hoge, Sam Burns, Luke List, Cameron Smith, Hideki, and Paul Casey. So good stuff to look at there. Let's bring up a previous leaderboard. I believe this is Hideki's. No, that's DJ's. Of course. So let's bring up Hideki's. And you can see here, I mean, this is the strokes gained tab. We have nothing for tee approach around the green putting. Fairways and greens, there's a little bit we can gather. So we can't do the left or driver right. We do get greens in regulation, good drives, distance, fairways, sand saves. We'll cover this a whole lot tomorrow, just kind of going through and showing you what we can and can't gather. Fairways and greens. Oh, sorry, we were on that tab. Dumbass. Birdies and bogeys we can gather. That's pretty simple, I believe, to gather. You'll take a quick notice. At least last year's bogeys avoided was seemingly more important than birdies. Just to give you a quick look. Proximity gained, have no data there. We have no data on putting, but we do have par 3, par 4, and par 5 per usual some years. There are no par 3s that measure from 0 to 150, and surprisingly there's no par 3s that measure 200 to 225. So they all fall in these three buckets. But there are some years, well shoot, I'm going to have to go back to this one. There are some years that don't gather any of the data. I thought it was 2019, it might be 2018. So some years you don't have any of this, we just have the pure strokes gained par 3. So like I said, the data is inconsistent, spotty, but we will dissect and analyze everything that we can tomorrow, especially in the Data Dive show. Again, just kind of running through this, showing you what is and isn't there. Let's see, one last thing I guess we can kind of take a look at. We saw it in the graph in the course breakdown. We can take a look at 3-putt avoidance, because I mentioned how important that's going to be here at Augusta National. So same filter, date filter, not including last year's Masters. Add the bent filter, add the fast and the lightning filter. So these players are your best 3-putt avoiders on fast and lightning bent greens. Joaquin Niemann, Patrick Reed, Tony Finau, Xander Schauffele, Eric Van Rooyen, Seamus Power, Cam Davis, Abraham Ancer, Colin Morikawa, and Shane Lowry. Trying to think back on who some of the top, well, I can tell you. So Seamus Power was number 4 in strokes gained putting total on fast and lightning bent greens, 4th total and 6th in 3-putt avoidance. Cam Davis was 8th in 7th. Abraham Ancer is 3rd and 8th. So those are the only 3 players that are tops in both total strokes gained putting and 3-putt avoidance on fast and lightning bent greens. So good stuff there. That is going to do it for the Fantasy National portion. All right, so let's move to Microsoft Excel. bring that up. We're going to come to this chart here. And again, this is all of the statistics that we're able to gather for Augusta National. Now, normally I don't go back any further than 2017. Guys generally, guys change. Best example is Bryson and whatnot. But due to the lack of overall data that we can gather, I went ahead and went back all the way to 2012, which is how far back Fantasy National can go. So there are a possible 9 events. Again, I'm excluding the fall when Dustin Johnson won. Cameron Smith came in second. I'm excluding that Masters because it was so unique. It was the only one that's played in the fall, all that stuff. So there are 9 events possible. Some of your best performers. Jordan Spieth has played it 7 times. He's averaged a top 6 finish. He's won it in that time span. Tony Finau has played it 3 times, averages a top 8. John Rahm 4 times, averages a top 11. Justin Rose, he is 8 for 9 with an average of a top 16. Xander 3 for 3, top 18. Tiger, 2019 winner, 5 for 5, average finish of top 20. I want you to put in the comments, do you think Tiger's going to play this week? I certainly have my, prediction or thought about it, but I want to hear from you all. Let's see. Lee Westwood has played extremely well in the Masters, 6 for 7. Rory, 8 for 9. JT, 5 for 5. DJ, 5 for 7. So, just like in previous weeks on courses, these are the stats specifically to the course at hand, in this case, Augusta National. I mentioned how greens are going to be so very important. You can see here the guys that are generally playing the best, having the best finishes, with the exception of Tony Finau. Most of these guys are heavy green in the greens and regulation gained. It's just such an important statistic. I mean, yes, Will Zalatoris only played it once, but he gained 9. That's asinine. Jordan Spieth, 6.8. Justin Rose, 6.75. Morikawa, 7. He only played it once. That's kind of his thing. Justin Thomas, 6.25. It's just a lot of importance here on greens and regulation. In the same aspect, good drives gained too. And I went ahead and brought in all of the players, even the amateurs and those who have not played, just for a clear, look. And obviously, I will be adding JJ Spawn later tonight or tomorrow to this list. But there is a look at some of the important things as far as driving distance, greens. You can see like fairways, because everybody is focused on hitting fairways. There's not a lot of advantage to be gained by hitting a lot of fairways because everybody's just trying to do it. I mean, look at Tiger. Tiger seemingly didn't hit a fairway in his 5 times here, but yet he has still won. Adam Scott, not all that important on hitting fairways. Hideki, basically field average. Bubba, slightly below field average. So not that important. It's all about the greens and regulation. We come over here and look at eagles, birdies, and bogeys. And while there is a good deal of green shade here up at the top, it is not nearly as dark and not nearly as often as the bogeys avoided. So I am leaning quite heavily towards bogeys avoided being the most important statistic, but we're going to take a very long look at that tomorrow in the data dive. And then finally, to wrap up the show tonight, let's look at par 3s, 4s, and 5s. Par 3s, to me, the least important of the hole by par. Par 3s matter, but I mean, you can see, the highest shade of green here is at 6.3, whereas in the par 4s there's an 8.5 There's a couple of 6s here, 4.9. Like the same shade of green over here is probably 4.3, 2.16. So the numbers fall off drastically quickly over here, whereas you've got some strong numbers quite far down into here. I mean, you got 2.2 all the way down to Mark Leishman, whereas DJ's 2.15 here. There's 2.3 here. So not a lot of big importance here in the par threes. I think it's completely strokes gained par three. Again, we'll take a really, really big look into this tomorrow. But right off the bat, it looks like it's just strokes gained par three. Moving over to the par fours, your strokes gained par four, we saw just how important that was graphically in terms of par threes versus par fours versus par fives. The fours really gained momentum on the par fives once you looked at just the winners. So, and if there is a range of or length of par fours, I still think it's going to be this one. It might not look at least color-coded wise. I'll show you some numbers tomorrow that will really highlight the importance of this length of par four. So in the meantime, in the research that you're doing tomorrow, or listening to other analysts and pundits in the industry, be mindful of the players that are very good from this range of par fours, 450 to 500. And then finally, we'll look at par fives. There are a few occasions when a par five from this bucket, the 500 to 550, falls into here, but it's not very often. So these are the two buckets of par fives that we'll be taking a look at. It doesn't look like either one is all that important in terms of relation to the other. Looks like it's just strokes gained par five, but you see some of the heavy shade of green. This is just speaking to the graph of Fantasy National, how important par fives are here. You've got to get those birdies. So that's going to do it for the initial research show tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Joey, thanks for jumping in chat like you always do. Tomorrow will be the Data Dive show. It's going to be quite intensive because there is less data to analyze. We're going to scrutinize and dissect every way we can the data that we are able to get. So tomorrow will be very data centric. Will be right up my alley. Hopefully I will be able to give you all some insights, glean some information for you all that might give you an advantage over your fellow contestants leading up to DFS, or give you some insights on some outright wagers that you might want to consider. So for all of the contests and wagers you had this past week at the Valero, for all of your March Madness brackets that still might be going, that conclude tomorrow, and for any of the wagers that you're early on thinking about at the Masters, until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive show, may all your bets be profitable.